I will introduce Louis very briefly, and then I will ask Louis to introduce his panelists in turn very briefly as well, because of course, we did take up quite a bit of your time. Louis describes himself as a lifelong learner who has been building on the web since the 1990s and is working on AI-driven solutions since 2015. He is the co-founder of Lindie, and he helps financial services and manufacturing clients across the Americas to turn their chaotic and incomplete data into rapid insights and new revenue. Very interesting. Louis, I'm sure it's a wonderful and challenging life at the same time. He's a member here at CCGI, and we love having him always participate with us. So Louis, I'm going to hand over to you now so that you can introduce your panelists and get this started.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kamala. And wow, after such a great opening panel, we've got some big shoes to fill, but we're just going to choose some different shoes and talk about some different things, so we don't feel so small in President Sarkisian's shadow. And so just really quickly, you know, our panel today is again wide-reaching and very talented. Shiva Bissessar has really been working in strategic ICT and information security for a couple decades now. You know, started tracing crypto things in over a decade ago, and you know, currently serves on the Trinidad and Tobago National Risk Assessment for virtual assets and asset providers, and has really been involved in all sorts of Caribbean digital currency projects. And I'll just introduce everyone up front so you know who they are, and then we'll get them to share some of their thoughts. And next up, Sonia Ceballos is a telecoms and electrical engineer, the master's degree in management information communication. Again, a couple decades in the field, really, you know, in leading the European telecom sector, and is now co-founder of Socius Ltd and Techway, where, you know, she's really helping businesses to improve their telecom and financial services performance. And you know, she's successfully led organizations of all sizes, really focused on agile methodologies and e-governance. So lots of good insights there. Professor Eelco Fiole, where to even begin? You know, with over 25 years in the financial services and technology industry, he's both a professor as well as a COO and CFO of very notable blockchain projects. You know, his PhD in economics has led him to all kinds of adventures around the world, you know, having visited over 100 countries and won several awards. He'll definitely have some insights for us. And last, but definitely not least, Avia Lindie, who's really been a visionary leader of business development over 25 years. She's launched several of her own companies, as well as being CEO of others. She's served as the president of the Rotary Club of Georgetown Central, been part of the Chamber of Commerce, and really, you know, received her MBA from the Australian Institute of Business. And aside from being a proud mother, she's really helping build a global community of leaders to affect positive change worldwide. So we'll start in reverse order now, and we'll let Avia take the floor and share some of her opening thoughts to kick off the panel.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Louis, and I quite agree with you that we have big shoes to fill. It's coming after Professor Garrett and President Sarkisian and Camille and the other panelists. I think that laid the foundation for what we're going to talk about. But I feel like the baby or the rookie on this panel, so I'm going to learn a lot from you guys, and I look forward to an engaging discussion. So today I'm going to talk a little about, we were tasked with addressing how redefining the social and technology space for small states. So to set the stage, I want to give a little context about Guyana for those who are here who may not know about Guyana. So A little overview about Guyana. Guyana is located, it's the only English-speaking country located on the northern coast of South America, bordered by Venezuela to the west, Brazil to the south, Suriname to the east, and the Atlantic Ocean to the north. So Guyana is a founding member of CARICOM and therefore part of the single market and single economy of other member states. We are a nation of approximately 800,000 people, relatively small in size, but strategically significant. And according to the United Nations, around 70% of Guyana's population is under the age of 35. So we're a very young nation. There are more persons living out of Guyana in the diaspora that is actually living in Guyana. A bit of our economic outlook. Guyana is currently recognized as the fastest growing economy in the world per capita, thanks to the rapid development of its oil and gas sector. And this economic growth presents both immense opportunities and challenges, particularly in leveraging technology to ensure sustainable and inclusive progress. So we'll talk a little about leveraging technology for national growth. As Guyana navigates its period of transformation, technology plays a pivotal role. Recently, I co-created with a technologist, Avia, which is a digital solution, which is to fill training gaps. So in Guyana specifically, we have a fast-growing industry in where we're pushing tourism. So, but we have some challenges in terms of customer service and communication and employee onboarding. So I thought of finding a solution that will be cost-effective, that can be accessible on a smartphone with no apps to download, so that we can fast-track this industry here in Guyana and make it more affordable. So we transform the landscape of Guyana in terms of offering excellent customer service experiences for persons who are coming here to do business and anyone in general. So recently I participated in a conference where I kind of like launched the product, because it's relatively new. And there were some gaps that were identified in terms of people's awareness. So there's a technology awareness gap. Like some observations I made, like people found it difficult to scan a QR code, which is pretty basic, I think, in first world countries. But they found it difficult to scan a QR code, to add a contact, to scan someone's contact, to add them to WhatsApp. Like basic things that we would assume that persons should know, they don't know. So, and it's quite understandable, because technology is moving at a pace faster than light, I'd like to say. So those are some of the gaps that I'm hoping that this solution and other solutions that we develop will be able to solve. So I want to move on a little to strategic national planning for digital transformation. So this requires thoughtful planning at a national level. So I was talking to a veteran technologist a few days ago, and he was telling me about a solution, the whole of government architecture. So in Guyana, because we're a fast-growing economy, we do not have everything that we should, because we're doing a bunch of stuff all at the same time. So our architecture needs attention. So this approach focuses on moving from siloed capabilities to connected platforms and cross-agency collaboration, enhancing the user experience. So it's difficult to access government services. You basically may have to show up with the same set of information at various government agencies to access these services, when we could have like an integrated infrastructure. However, most recently, the president has a vision, and it's something that will come on stream, to introduce a one-card technology, which will enable e-services for everyone who is doing business. It will improve the ease of doing business in Guyana for locals, as well as those investors that are coming to Guyana. Recently, a few weeks ago, we launched at our airport e-gates, and this is to streamline the processes of incoming and outgoing passengers, offering faster check-in times, smoother security screenings, and more convenient overall experience. Moving along, we have some initiatives in terms of the Greater Guyana Initiative, which is an investment of the Stabroek Block Co-Ventures with ExxonMobil, Hess, and CNOG Petroleum Guyana, where they committed $100 million US to building prosperous communities and various digital infrastructure. To conclude, Guyana is looking at empowering our key productive sectors. This is in agriculture. Recently, we launched a new agriculture information service, which is aimed at boosting productivity, improving decision-making, and strengthening the accountability in the agriculture sector. As it relates to education and the workforce development, as referred to prior in the previous discussions, there are initiatives with the University of Guyana and STEM, their local funded STEM programs with the IDB. And those are just a few of the initiatives that Guyana is implementing currently. So pretty much Guyana's rapid economic growth presents a unique opportunity to redefine the social and technological landscape by focusing on strategic planning, user-centric design, and private sector collaboration. And we can set an example for other small states. So with that, I will conclude my initial.
Thank you, Avia. That was
back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to hear how Guyana is working to really harness the growth that's being presented right now, and to follow us up, the bit different perspective. Professor Fiole, would you like to share just a few minutes of thoughts, and we'll try and save more of it for the panel today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I'm originally a Dutchman. In the Netherlands is not a big country. I live in Switzerland. It's even less populated than the Netherlands. And I spent around 4 years of my life in Liechtenstein, which is a 30,000 people country. So I've seen a few things in operation, let's say. Excuse me. I think that what we are faced with today, and the previous panel has touched upon it, is massive macro change. Be it sustainability requirements out of climate change, social movements, of which we can see an example today in the United States, but also a huge development in what I call exponential technologies, call it AI, blockchain, and so on and so forth. And so the question is a bit, how are we dealing with these macro changes on behalf of others, of populations and people around us, given that the idea of a linear development or a regular sort of career development or tech development, any development that you have in mind originally, is sort of out of the window. There are so many big influences there. And the previous panel touched upon it. There is an element, there's a steady element of trusted leadership needed. There's a sense of purpose needed. There's also, and I will speak more about it later, proper governance needed. And we can talk about how that should look like in order to help people feel comfortable dealing with all of this change and also find their spot. And I'd like to close here, because to your point, Louis, I think that we will speak a lot in the panel about this, and we can come up with examples and some frameworks around it. Thank you.
Thank you. And no doubt some of the blockchain organizations you've been part of governing, have more assets than some small states anyway. So quite a relevant perspective. And moving our way back up, Sonia, I'm curious from Belize and some of your experience. How do you see the social and technology space changing?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this really relevant topic in today's world. And I think this is a topic that is not Caribbean topic. This is a world topic, correct? Because I love to call this the intersection between technology and society. That's how I always call it, correct? And I see some key aspects. The first one for me is the digital inclusion of access, correct? I think in that we are a little bit behind if we can see the development that is happening in other areas of the world. Belize in particular ran a very interesting program, and actually that's how I arrived in Belize in 2016, where we did a full deployment of fiber to the home, reaching 90% of the country, and full deployment of LTE advanced. So I think from connectivity, that was a big step we did. So access and digital inclusion is the first thing. We need to make sure that people get access to be able to develop economy, apply different services, globalization, etc. So I think that's the first key aspect I want to talk about. The second one, workforce and employment shift. Very, very important. We all can talk about ours, how AI and all these technologies are going to replace people. But I think the discussion at the government level should be is how are we going to reskill our people in order to be successful, correct? I have another clear example for Belize is our economy depends strongly on BPOs, call centers, correct? I'm not saying that those are going to disappear, but certainly some of them are going to be affected and impacted for this new technology. So what are we doing in order to reskill all these employees? How are we going to reallocate them? How are we going to position them to still being competitive in the existing economy? Third aspect is the technology for social good. And here we talk aspect about financial inclusion. Belize has been working hard on the introduction of digital wallets and other opportunities for facilitating the financial inclusion. But I think in here is a lot about also education, correct? We all used to complain that we don't have payment methods, that we don't have that. And now after a few years that I see all the technology has arrived, I still don't see the evolving of the people. So I think that a lot of these programs, and I don't want to deviate from him a little bit, but something that for me is critical, and I see a lot on this part of the world, is we buy technology. We don't use the technology to enable a solution. We buy technology and we figure out where do we put this technology. And I think that's one of the aspects that we need to look at. And mentioned before the government digitalization, correct? So that's fundamental. If I live in the city, I can walk and go and get my birth certificate. If I live in Punta Gorda, I have to take a bus 4 in the morning, drive 5 hours, arrive to here, do a queue of another 5 hours, get my birth certificate, and drive another 4 hours back. So that's certainly something that we cannot talk about, technology availability and the impact on society. Then social media and digital communities. In here, of course, we all know about social media, and I think that's everywhere that is rich is there. But I think what we need to improve and we need to work on is the negative impact of that. And that's applied to education, and that applies to information, cybersecurity, bullying, and all the things that are happening due to this exposure. So it's not only to provide technology, but it's how can we educate society to use this technology and the good. And the last point is the ethics and privacy. And in here is 2 aspects. Of course, we have the responsibility to protect the data. And as we're digitalizing more and more our governments and any institution, of course, more and more data is going to be available. But the second aspect, even more important, especially for the new generations, is, again, the education. What data are you posting? What data are you letting available? What information are you giving available? Considering that anything you put in the network, in the internet, will remain there forever. So all those aspects are a combination of what I see the key aspects of this intersection of interaction between technology and society. And I'm looking forward for the rest of the panel discussion to touch a little bit more into these topics. But that was a little bit like kind of the aspect that for me are so important, and a little bit how we link those aspects to the current Belize environment.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really great segue to Shiva. I see you just turned your camera off. Hopefully it means you're still here. I know, given your experience with strategic ICT and information security, the data privacy is probably top of mind. Just give him a couple seconds, but we might just wait and take his points during the panel. So given that we're a little short on time, I'd love to open it up. And it's interesting that one of the points that Professor Garrett made this morning was really about our rate of learning. And Sonia touched on education. I think we all see that education is a massive issue. Shiva, if you want to just give a couple minutes of thoughts here before we kick off the panel, that we could maybe dive in from there on what type of education is really needed at the governance level so that our leaders can make good decisions and provide the guidance that we need.
Well, specifically on education, I'm sorry, I had to get my earphones as the rains just came down across here, so I missed the intro. I had a little just brief introduction based on cybersecurity, if you would allow me to deliver that. So looking at the name of this particular session, Redefining the Social and Technology Space, I'm taking a bit of liberty with it. And I'm gonna venture that it's more about it's incumbent upon us to keep up with changes taking place in the social and technology space, rather than trying to adapt with it or trying to change it or redefine it. And I raise in particular the area of cybersecurity, where the risks we are seeing being manifest at home here in Trinidad and the wider Caribbean. I'm left questioning, are we truly prepared for this wave of threats that is breaking up on us now? So in last year, in 2023, we had several incidents reported in the media, significant incidents, even ransomware events, where victims were particularly targeted. And this is alarming to us. And people may not recognize this, in that some of these attacks are not by chance, but they are targeted. And we know this based on the after effects of the forensic analysis of these attacks. We know the ransomware groups involved, and we know their tactics. And the names of the victims are actually hard-coded in the files that they use in some of these attacks. So this implies, pre-planning. This implies a deliberate attempt to get into your organization. And these guys are out there right now targeting you. We no longer can say that, we are small, we are under the radar, we are safe. The evidence of attacks says otherwise. And are we prepared for this? So at that corporate governance level, I think what we need to examine is, for example, are we aware of some of these threat actors that are out there? Are we aware of groups like Hive or Revel or RansomX or Lockbit? And these are all groups that have targeted Caribbean entities. Maybe not all of them targeted, but have attacked Caribbean entities since 2020. And if we are not aware of these groups, the bigger question to ask now is, do they know you? Having gone through that piece of information that they deliberately target some of these victims. Part of the work we do is involved in blockchain analytics. And we have looked at the wallets, the digital wallets of some of these ransomware groups. We've looked at Revel, for example, that did target a Caribbean entity. And we were able to see $14 million in inflows and outflows from this particular ransomware group wallet. So the stakes are very high. These guys are very organized. These are cyber criminal groups that operate in a similar fashion as you have software as a service. You have now ransomware as a service. And the question we need to ask is, do corporate governance structures understand this risk? Are you sensitive to this risk? How are you reacting, or what is your reaction to the budget approval process once it hits your level in catering to cybersecurity threats? What about your organizational structure? Is your organizational structure prepared for this type of risk? And organizational structure is one that is particularly of interest, given that in first world countries, we would see a tendency now towards that Chief Information Security Officer role. How much of that have we seen within the Caribbean? Or within the Caribbean here, are we adapting and adopting some of these measures that first world countries are embracing to respond to these cybersecurity threats? Do we merely see IT as a cost center, or do we see information security as protection measures for our revenue streams? And that perception is completely different. It's completely different as to how you view your protection of that revenue stream via an information security response. Within the US or within global surveys, we see 47% of the CISOs now reporting to Chief Information Security Officer, to the Chief Executive Officer or the Chief Information Officer. But do we have this level of Chief Information Security Officer in organizations? And as I started at the beginning of the presentation, if we're not moving with the changes, you're going to be swept away. So we need to respond, we need to react, we need to be abreast of some of these changes that are taking place in organizational response to information security. What is your budget like? How is your budget appropriated? Is it simply buying technology solutions? Are you catering to people and process dimensions? These are some of the questions we need to ask at that governance level. And why this is important is because criminals nowadays, as I alluded to with the ransomware as a service statement, criminals today are organized as real actors or enterprises that pull from other areas of the ecosystem the services that they require to carry out their attacks. So one particular entity may specialize in call center operations. Another may specialize in getting entry into the particular victim. Another entity may specialize in laterally moving around once they have a foothold within the victim. And there's an enterprise of actions that are taking place. It's an ecosystem, it's a criminal ecosystem. And part of the work I've been involved in is advocating for, if we are facing a criminal ecosystem, then we have to have an equal response. We have to have an ecosystem of cybersecurity professionals. And I believe some of the speakers earlier alluded to that information sharing and collaboration type aspect is needed at the smaller state levels to counter some of the threats that we are seeing now. It's all the same. And again, if we're not prepared for the changes that are coming, we are going to be swept over. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shiva, and thank you everyone for the points here. I think very relevant, and moving the discussion forward a little bit. I'm curious. We're talking about the evolution of technology and also how that's eroding trust. Right? AI has made trust nearly impossible. You can't trust what you see or hear as if you could have before. But now at least we can acknowledge that, there is no trust on the internet, but at the same time, there is the potential for great trust on the internet and great trust through technology. So I'm curious how you all see us, moving beyond this point of, almost absolute zero into a future where perhaps we can trust.
if I may, Sonia, you raised quite a few interesting sentiments, as well as Shiva, who talked about cybersecurity. But in response to your question, I came across, I was listening to a podcast recently, and I came across this book from Salman Khan, who is the founder of Khan Academy. And the name of the book is Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. And we spoke just now about, we're speaking about agency, and we're speaking about values that came out earlier. And he shared some interesting perspective, and I'd like to quote. He said that AI is neither inherently good or bad. It's a reflection of human intent. And as he eloquently puts it, any technology is an amplification of the human intent. And in essence, AI is a tool. And like any tool, its impact depends on how we choose to use it. Bad actors can also misuse the same AI that can revolutionize education by offering personalized learning experiences to amplify negative outcomes. So we come back to values, because we would have gone through lots of changes in the world, and we would have had to embrace lots of new technology and different revolutions that we have gone through over time. But it comes back to our values and level of accountability. And it comes right back to what Shiva was talking about as it relates to cybersecurity. I think his concerns are well founded, and that's an area that we really need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have points on? Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, thanks. So on the topic of trust, and not in any particular order, if I first look at the technology, we have nowadays under development trust technology, also known as blockchain. And that is a technology which helps us transfer anything of value. It could be money or information or risk, or from A to B. And so I think that we have an opportunity with technology and attestation around technology to help us create a trust architecture. Something that, of course, as you alluded to, Louis, earlier, is been going on now for some time, and I've been also privy to working in that field. Now, if you look at what is the source of trust today, you know, it is things like proper governance. It is the feeling of people that they have, you know, that they are being represented, that they're not being lied to, and so on. So I think that Shiva, or sorry, Avia, you just mentioned also the idea of values, sort of expressing the values which are important in leadership, and then acting on that and maybe execute that through trust technology is something that is visible for people to gain trust in institutions again. So it is developing institutions and operating those institutions, and that is and I think there's work to do on that in that field. I think also there's so much misinformation out there, and people easily believe things that having a drive for, let's call it first principles, like why is something really important? What is, what are the values here? Ask 5 times why, and coming to the core of something and having simple communication there and build structure around that may help. I know that this sounds pretty a bit vague yet, but maybe we'll get into more examples later on that we talk about how does it work, maybe in sort of small states or building up ecosystems, etc., etc.
if I can add something there, you know, the thing is what I mentioned before about technology, but let's think about society first. What is the evolution of the society? And then here, of course, we can talk about values, about how we were educating, how our new kids are educated. So there is a complete shift on society, correct? Let's start from that perspective. Now, of course, on parallel, and that's what I like to call the word intersection, in parallel, technology is developing in many, many aspects in many areas. So those are coming now together. So depends on how society evolution is going, is also how I am using this technology. And they interact with each other. Of course, the technology also open new opportunities for interactions. So I think for me, the big point is how society is evolving, because it's not all about technology. You know, if we were thinking about 10 years ago, how my mother was with me, and now how my sisters are with my nephews, it's a complete different environment. So society has changed, education has changed, and in parallel, technology is also changing. So all these things together are making the difference. And I think that's where we need to analyze. And then words like you guys mentioned, values, critical, governance, how are you going putting the proper policies, how are you defining, how are you educating with all this technology that is coming, how are we managing the missing information, and even more important is who is influencing this information, because we cannot forget that factor, that now there is somebody there influencing all of us in what do we eat, what do we buy, how do we learn, and everything. So all these aspects are important. So yes, we're talking about technology, but I think is very critical is what is the evolution of the society and how can we intercept those two to create a better society. And we will always have people who is doing attacks. We will have always, that has happened before, just in another ways, but always has been there. So I think is how can we look at this intersection and then provide the right tools, governance values to make sure that this is providing us a better society and a better evolution and not a worse, right? That's my point.
Yeah, welcome, Kamala. Yeah.
Thank you. I just found what Sonia was sharing to be so critical. And I think it's an area that we should really explore. And that is, you know, when we talk about this technology and social space, that intersection she just mentioned is critical for us to understand the importance of ownership of that space. Because the technology is changing and it's changing our behaviors as well. So when she spoke to the difference between the generations and how parenting styles have changed as well, the technology has influenced that, because where previously parents felt they knew everything, so you could tell your child things, today that's flipped. Today, children know more than their parents because of the technology. And so the relationship has had to change. And therefore, what we have to figure out as well is maintaining that principled, centered type value system that should continue irrespective of the space, but we can't be blind to how much that technology impacted the space. And Professor Eelco, I wanted to ask you in particular, because I know this is an area in which you've spent a lot of time. When you think of ethics in the technology space, particularly, given that we have so many challenges with understanding deep fakes, you know, the miscommunication. So even as it was mentioned that not everything is all communication isn't there. People sometimes make decisions with wrong information. Is there some type of technology which can assist us, that can become easily available to society, and more so those of us who are part of that older generation? So it doesn't come easy to us, but we have to know it in order to help guide the next generation. Yeah. Is there something that ethics can be worked into the technology to help us?
So yes, but it comes with a bit of a curve. So as we see the rise of what I call these exponential technologies, and as we said before, we can use these technologies, you know, for the good and also not for the good. And we can have AI programming other AI to do bad things, and then we can have AI programming AI to do also good things. And in that sense, we run risks including ethical risks that things get out of control. Now, for those people who are developing these technologies, I think those kind of ethical risks, as I call them, will need to be part and parcel of their design considerations. And I want to focus on the risks first. I mean, we can talk about the aspirations later, what we can achieve with it. And most entrepreneurs, they work with, oh, I can do this, I can do that with this technology, is all fantastic. But let's take a step back and think, okay, what are kind of risks are we facing? And so I think for designing these technologies, be it decentralized in a blockchain environment, but also, or centralized for that matter, or centralized in an AI environment, or other centralized developed technologies. Those considerations around ethical risk need to be flowing into design parameters. What do I mean by that? I mean that we need to think about analyzing who is going to be affected by this technology. And let's call these people or these entities, maybe even nature at large, stakeholders, okay? So whose interest is at stake? Then a second element of analysis that is scenario planning. How can this play out negatively, and how can we mitigate that in our design as well? So not just design code and be able to transact something, that's wonderful, but then also think about how can we control this not getting out of hand, and where do we do a cap? I'm also a big proponent of understanding potential negative behavior of stakeholders in those networks. If you have criminals, if you have people who collude, if you have abuse of things, and how to mitigate for that. So if you think about regulating this technology, in my mind, we do way too little of ethical analysis and also behavioral analysis, where behavior speaks about behavioral science typically speaks about nudging or taking biases out and all of the. This is very important, but it doesn't provide direction if something is good or not good. And we can consult with the field of ethics to understand, are we doing something right or not? So this ethical analysis, understanding stakeholders, understanding scenarios, mitigating risks, be careful with these things. These kind of things need to flow into any protocol that we design, let's say for the use cases that we see. I should add one more element to this, and that is that those technologies that we currently speak about are technologies that take a run with other people's money, other people's information, also ID and so on. And so they are much more critical than a technology which I use. If I use this technology, which is a pen, which you can't see, right? I mean, if my pen doesn't work, I can throw it away and I can get a new one. That is not the case with an AI application. So it's almost, it's technology which comes with fiduciary responsibilities. And let me stop on fiduciary there, because there's much to say about this. One more element to this is that who has the fiduciary responsibility versus our peoples? These are our leaders. These are our governments around us. So both government leaders as well as other leaders. And this awareness of this fiduciary responsibility and how that flows into leadership, but also regulation and so on, that needs to be, if it's not already there, it needs to be created and translated into real life policy. Let me stop there.
Thank you. I really appreciated that. But it does tell us, though, that we are basically at the mercy of those who are designing the system, that they will understand the importance of ethics and working that into the design as well. So I won't hold my breath because, as we have shared, people are people. You'll get good and bad actors, and therefore we have to be aware. So Shiva, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you specifically, as we talk about the cybersecurity space, that there will always be bad actors, and it's important for our boards to understand that cybersecurity is a must in their organizations. However, it's an extremely costly type undertaking. And I noted your point earlier that a lot of boards may actually still view IT as a cost center rather than looking at the way in which they can bring benefits to the organization. I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the possibility for a measure of collaboration across industries, across sectors that would allow organizations to be able to prepare for a cyber attack, rather than each company trying to be ready on their own?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, because in looking at something like ransomware, and then looking at some of the victims that we've seen within the Caribbean, these are large entities. These are not small entities. They have distinct information security structure within them. How do we now prepare for the next event? And I would advocate for some, and again, along the theme of collaboration and building out an ecosystem, I believe there's a responsibility. I don't mean to place it on the victims, but these are the guys who've gone through it and have experience with it. There is a responsibility now to come together to prevent future attacks, to share learnings on attacks, to bolster the information security posture, not only within your own organization, but within the country. There is a current crunch right now with respect to information security professionals globally. And we have that here in Trinidad and Tobago. In April of this year, it was reported that the public sector is complaining about that, and they are blaming the private sector for it. But the private sector themselves are finding it hard to find good professionals in this field. Where is the pipeline? How are we building out a pipeline of these professionals? So to answer your question, I would say, yes, we need that community. We need that ecosystem approach. And a good starting point would be some of those victims that really understand the criticality of these issues and want to hit back against some of these criminal actors, because they are criminals. And I noted in some of the initial response that people were not very pleased that they were attacked. But this is the reality of the world we live in. Now we need to move on. We need to embrace each other. We need to collaborate with each other to prevent future attacks.
If may I would like to add something in there, because there is a lot of emphasis on the preparation, the people, and I fully agree with that. There is another aspect, is the risk management side. What will you do when you get attacked? And that is very, very important. And I haven't seen many companies in the Caribbean are all focusing on that, because you will get attacked. There is a big chance that you will get one-time attack. Is how are you going to react to that? Are you going to negotiate? Are you going to do all that? Plans has to be built at company level and at government level, because that is where I don't see in any companies. We have risk management plan for hurricanes. We have that for fires, but not for cybersecurity. And we will have to make a decision when we get attacked. What are we going to do? And I think that's something that I don't see much happening here yet, and that I try to discuss with the companies I work with and trying to work on it, but it is difficult for them to understand, because we are very reactive, unfortunately, more than proactive. But this risk management analysis for cybersecurity, in my opinion, is very, very important, because we need to know how are we going to react when it happens to us, and probably it will.
If I may just volunteer. So yes, I know at the national level, you're going to have incident response teams at that CERT level, which are charged with the responsibility of lending assistance to entities when they fall victim to such attacks. At the organizational level, yes, you are quite correct that you need to have your incident plans in place, your business continuity plans in place. And these cannot live in a desk somewhere. They have to be exercised. They have to be constantly updated. So these are the responsibilities of information security governance approach within the organization to cater to these type of risks and make sure you have the planning in place, incident response in place, recovery in place. And we we learn a lot from disaster management with hurricanes and those type of systems where telecom providers are often very good in the Caribbean with respect to disaster response and bringing backup systems. So there are lessons we can learn from other industries and put them into practice within our organizations and at the national level. And at the national level, we need to pay attention, particular attention to, for example, critical infrastructure and making sure that critical infrastructure, banking, telecoms, and so on are not negatively affected by these type of risks.
That's a really good point in terms of, and I like this particular phrase that you use, you know, that you have to have your response plan, but it can't just live on a desk. It has to be updated continually because technology is always changing, right? So, and again, here we are talking about cost involved in always being ready. But Louis, if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question. Because a lot of this does come back to the quality of leadership within organizations, you know, within our boards, in wanting to be able to embrace the unknown. You can't predict what exactly is going to happen. And so you have to interact with a lot of organizations across the Caribbean, you know, and the US. Are you finding that there is that willingness or at the board level where there's usually persons of a different generation to be open enough to listening to younger professionals who are bringing information that's basically Greek to them? How have you been able to work that space?
Yeah. Wow. Well, you know, I think one thing is folks are always willing to listen to results, right? So it doesn't really matter so much what your age is, as long as you can show that there is some, you know, benefit to whatever you're you know, demonstrating or showing. And so it's more about, you know, how do we translate the benefits or the impacts of these things into a language that people understand and into the values that they have and the, you know, the outcomes that they're looking for. And so, you know, it's always tough to be a proponent of generational change in some ways, where we're going through a full evolution that, you know, is much faster than what we may have seen even through the whole mechanization wave, where, you know, we went from people on production lines to robots and ultimately to, you know, somebody just sitting behind the screen and telling the robots what to do and running the whole production floor. That speed of change is so much slower than what we're witnessing now that, you know, folks are, I think we've all heard enough about it that we're peripherally aware, but connecting that to something real is always very difficult. And so whether it's AI or blockchain or whatever comes next, you know, I think the challenge of bridging that gap is finding someone who's willing to listen to results and evidence or data as opposed to their own intuition or their own experience. And of course, I'm sure we've all seen, you know, where folks at the most senior level are very confident in their experience and very sure of what they know. And so it can take a bit of effort to you know, bring them across the channel, so to speak. And Eelco, it sounds like you've also seen a bit of that.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. So cyber is one of those topics, but there are more that are not very well understood in boardrooms. And the awareness that they're sitting on valuable data, for example, is hardly there. The idea is that it happens somewhere else and that they can ask the head of IT if everything is all right, although cyber is more maybe an organizational topic than a technical topic. And so what I tend to say is that those kind of risks, they transfer into other risks for which they are much more sensitive. For example, financial risk, the cost of cleaning things up, but also reputational risk, both to the organization as well as to the individual. So if something happens, who was paying attention? It was Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, and they were not paying attention, and that's not good for the reputation. So it's typically you will not get many admissions that, no, I have no clue what I'm looking at. But if you say, listen, this is a real risk to the business and a reputation risk as well as a financial risk, and therefore you need to clean up your act. And we have all this wonderful data here that can be abused. Then maybe there's a little bit more awareness. We can talk about, and Louis asked a question about learning and education. We can also talk about how do we educate for that and some of those other exponential topics. Maybe later, but it's that is, I think, to bring it close to the decision makers. It's your reputation, it's your P&L, that is something that speaks the language. In Europe, we see now also regulation coming in, which may be helpful. In my observation, regulation is not necessarily taken that serious in the sense like, oh, this is just the next batch of regulation. Okay, I'll give it to my compliance person to look into. When he may make it personal, then maybe we can create some sensitivity around it without people having to lose face by saying, actually, I don't know what this is about.
So, Louis, there are a couple of people who have some comments in the chat, but specifically, relating to the need for regulations. So if it's okay, I wanted to invite one of our participants, that's Oswald Chisholm. Oswald, if you are able to unmute, I noticed that you spoke specifically about the need for legislation in order that there be better control of the technologies that is happening. So would you like to elaborate on your question? I'm just checking to see if you're unmuted. If not, I'll follow up with the comment from Rajesh Pamanantu, who was saying that while legislation and controls are key for the protection of all concerned stakeholders, there is need for matching penalties and corrective actions to curb any unethical practices. Now, along with that concern for regulations and legislation, I want to add what Shiva just mentioned too. The importance of learning from those who have been impacted. And the reality is a lot of people are so afraid to open up and share. So it's going to be quite challenging for us to be able to develop that environment, that regulatory environment that doesn't suppress the innovative side of the use of technology, but deal with the bad actors. That to me is the key challenge. So, and Sonia, you would recall we spoke about this when we were discussing the implications of social media. Social media is having huge adverse effects as well. What is the regulatory environment that we should have in place to help in managing that society? So, Professor Eelco, I did see that you unmuted just now. So if you wanted to have a go at this first, we'd appreciate that.
I'll keep it brief, but I think that regulatory efforts are clearly needed in this field where we have so many powers being unleashed on us. We cannot just hope for the best and good intentions. So we need regulations, but I think that regulation alone is not going to do the job. We also need to have behavioral change. And so what was acceptable maybe 10 years ago may not be acceptable today or the other way around. And so I think that leadership needs to step up and look at each other and say, this is not the way we do business, right? I.e. hold each other accountable without having necessarily just a regulatory layover or just somebody else external to answer to. And that is a leadership question, that is a culture question, that is a recruiting question, and potentially it is also a question of using different language. So I give you an example. 15 years ago, nobody would know what a chief sustainability officer is. Today, we know what sustainability officers are. 10 years ago, nobody understood what cybersecurity was or CISO was, as Shiva mentioned. Nowadays, we know what CISOs are. And so we need different roles. We need different language, and let's recognize this and feed that with life as well. So yes, regulatory change, but also behavioral change. And in the previous panel, there was even a word of humility, and I think Nigel said it. Humility is actually very important to be able to steer in that direction. So we need some enlightened leadership there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. What we have found, and I'm responding now to another question and another comment in the chat this time from Indrani about the importance of boards being educated on cybersecurity. So CCGI, we have run a number of sessions on cybersecurity. And in my experience, it's difficult to get the directors themselves into those sessions. So the strategy we have used is we said, fine, okay, send your technical people, because the way in which we then share the information allows their technical people to know how to raise the conversation at board level. And that is how we get to also be able to enter the boardroom and bring our directors in. So I'm expecting to see a huge raise in the awareness of directors themselves with respect to cybersecurity issues. And Shiva, that's why I was asking, while we raise that awareness, it's important to also get them to act outside of their siloed presence. Because collaborative response would help. Yes, Sonia, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add something that what was said before by Professor Eelco is the education, yes, the new leaders, etc. But for me, this starts from schools. Correct? And that's one of the things I don't see happening here, at least in the Caribbean. We are still educating kids like we used to do it many years ago. And if we do not prepare now to be more analytic, I mean, AI will provide you a lot of information. So you have to create more critical mindsets, people who is ready to use it. And then, of course, the other soft behaviors. But for me, the education part is, yes, at the corporate level and the regulation level, but at the schools level. And there is where I see no movement really in any of the sectors. And even at university levels, you know, I am surprised how universities are still teaching in a very, very old fashion and not embracing all these technologies, not to copy paste from AI, but use it as a source, and then how you integrate all that. And I think that is where we are still failing badly in the Caribbean, at least, and I'm sure in the rest, but I am very exposed to the Caribbean part, and is we're really behind on that.
If I may, I'd like to endorse what Sonia said about the education system not, it's antiquated, so it's not relevant to the world that we live in today. And there's a couple of comments I wanted to follow up on. I know, Kamala, you mentioned about the generations in the workplace. There are like 4 generations in the workplace. And there was someone who spoke earlier about being open-minded. I think it was President Sarkisian who mentioned that we should question things. Not everything is always as they appear. So in my humble opinion, I think there's something called reverse mentoring, because we have these different generations in the workplace. It means that the mature generation has insights, and we have innovation coming from the younger generations. We want to know, how do we bridge the gap? So we can have reverse mentoring, where, and it requires humility, where you understand this is what I'm good at. I've been around for a while, that in a world and a reality that I'm aware of, but now we're both converging and living in a new reality. How can we come together, merging our insights or syncing them together, insight and innovation, so we can move forward? And I especially liked what Shiva spoke about these new roles, about cybersecurity. And we, like, for instance, if we were to look at the oil and gas sector, health, safety, and security is important. It has a value. It generates money. They can ill afford to have anything happening on a rig. It's the same strategy that can be used when we're dealing with technology. We need legislation, but then the legislation has to be enacted by human beings. Mm-hmm. So it's more or less comes back to culture, values, humility, leadership, regulation, but also in having a synergy between the generations where everybody accept the fact this is what I'm good at, but I'm living in a world that's different. You're more adept in technology. Let's see how we can have reverse mentoring so that we can bridge this gap and increase the knowledge base and have the transformation we're looking for in this part of the world and generally. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Avia. And I think your comment just now underscores something that Louis just asked very provocatively in the chat. He was responding to, I think it was Pamanan. Yes. Rajesh Pamanan. And so Louis' question was, how does a small state enforce penalties and corrective actions on foreign, possibly state-sponsored actors? So ultimately, we cannot just depend on the regulatory environment to protect us. It comes right back to us having the desire to understand how to maintain your value system, to have that value system embraced by others so that we can be stronger in that unity to respond when bad things happen, as they would.
So if I may, there are mechanisms of cooperation that you can have at that national level when it comes to legislative efforts in going after the bad actors that cross borders. But even before we go there, let's look right here at home. For example, Trinidad and Tobago, we have proposed a cybercrime bill from back in 2012, I believe, and nothing has taken place with respect to passage of that act or passage of that bill. And why is that so? And we talked a little bit about values and so on earlier, and trying to bake within technology values, but you need to bake values into the legislation as well. So part of the opposition to the legislation has been the possible treatment of media professionals and how they may be viewed in carrying out their duties. And it's very interesting to look back at what took place last year with respect to the ransomware events in the fourth quarter last year, and put a perspective on it of what if that legislation was in place? How would the media reporting on that incident, how would that have been interpreted under that law? And these are things that corporate governance institutes like yourselves need to I don't want to put the responsibility on you, but I mean, I'm seeing you as a body that you could rally support around this type of issue to help shape what we would like to see then, for example. And the aspects of social media and children and awareness, there are protection measures that are required with respect to child online protection that are urgently needed within this country and within the Caribbean on the whole. We had an incident most recently of a tragic case of a teen suicide and in response to physical and online bullying. What are we doing with respect to educating our teenagers with respect to social media, cyberbullying? These are real things, and adults face this. So imagine what happens when children have to face this. So technology is a good thing, can be used for good and bad. The social responsibility, our responsibility to get it right. I think that is why we need to get it right before the wave crashes on us.
That's a brilliant contribution. I just wanted to add, I think in Guyana, fortunately for us, we have cybercrime legislation, and I think it's also being updated. So I think there are quite a few persons that were, charged, not, but, so it's pretty active, and I think the Caribbean needs to be a little more open-minded when it comes to these things than to be reactive. It's important to be proactive, especially because we're vulnerable. We're small. Anything hits us, we're like 44.5 million people. It's, you know, how do we recover and the cost of recovery? So someone mentioned, you know, how do we sell to boards the importance of cybersecurity and why we need to pay for the software? We have to quantify it. So if you don't pay for it, this is what it's going to cost you. Hopefully that will bring about, I mean, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to twist their arms that way. But if that's the strategy that's going to work to protect us, I think it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we are a little smaller than what you said, Avia. I think if you look at the CARICOM region, it's really just 14 or 15 million, you know, very small. And just also wanted to point out that Camille said that Jamaica has a Cybercrimes Act and a Data Protection Act. So, you know, there are things in the region that we can use to follow. Yes, Professor Eelco, go ahead.
There was one thought that actually came to me listening also to the previous panel, and that is the topic of collaboration. And so if you are a small player and you're being you don't have much power, if you will, be it, you know, to avoid attacks or to project power elsewhere, then one way in my mind to actually mitigate risks materializing is being part of a larger group, maybe values-based community, where the community values what you bring. And that means that if I say values what you bring, it is developing those kind of resources and institutions locally or as part of an ecosystem, which other players in that ecosystem value. So they would come to one place because that one place is highly specialized in XYZ, and therefore those resources are fantastic, and delivers that to an ecosystem and is part and parcel of a larger community. I'm not a geopolitical specialist by no means, but I think that if you look at the semiconductor concentration in Taiwan, you know, being a small island, but having that much importance because they got this one superpower which is developing capabilities in the semiconductor space, and as a result, it is regarded, it is protected, it is a topic of world affairs. Any other island that size without that semiconductor would not be in the world news if there's something happening. So I think there are lessons in creating value, in creating institutions, in creating capabilities based on unique characteristics that any community has, and then collaborate based on this in a wider area, and as a result enjoy risk mitigation opportunities or protection for those kind of events.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that is a real challenge that is facing us, building that community, ensuring that we have that common value system that would also build trust so that we can rely on each other and be able to have that common defense.
Yeah. Sometimes you see these combinations based on geographic proximity, but maybe it's a community based on other characteristics. And other alliances. If you look at BRICS, it was just now discussed, BRICS clearly is not based on geographic proximity. It's based on other shared values, which you can agree with or not agree with, let's say. And another one that comes to mind is, of course, NATO, where the Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. And as a result, small states, part of NATO, are being protected. And so there are ways of, I think, of coordinating ourselves around shared values and value that one brings to a community. And that value is something that, of course, is very much dependent on what locally is being put in place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Louis, forgive me, I didn't mean to take over your panel, but this is a topic that is so important to me and a lot of what we've been doing here at CCGI. And I noticed too that our participants have been very active in the chat in making some input and contributions as well. The thing is, because we went over with our opening segment, it meant that we moved a little bit into our break time here as well. Luis, if it's okay, I want to hand back over to you so that you can invite your panelists to give their closing thoughts, and we can possibly just have a 5-minute break that allows everyone to have a quick bathroom break, and then we come to our next panel.
Yeah, absolutely, Kamla. And of course, it's great you came with some really great and pointed questions that I think really helped some of our panelists shine. So we'll do this in reverse order again of how we started, to just give a brief closing point. Kind of, if everyone just takes one thing from you today, what would that be? What should we really remember? So we'll start with you, Shiva.
Okay, so the responsibility is ours. At the board level, it's not a technical issue. It is an organizational issue, cybersecurity that is. But the whole concept of managing this technical and social space, the advances within it for our benefit. If we don't catch on to it, if we don't harness it, if we don't regulate it properly, it's the consequences on us. So it's in everyone's responsibility and everyone's interest to make a contribution to the space.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution. Sonia, how do you see this playing out more in Central America?
I think in general, for me, out of this is technology must evolve responsible, fostering inclusivity and sustainability to make our societies to go better. And there, of course, there is plenty of opportunities like everything and plenty of risk. I think then we need to work on all the necessary acts in order to protect us and all the education that is needed in order for us to embrace. So I think that's my main conclusion. I think in Central America, there is a lot going on. If you see El Salvador, especially, has completely shifted their leadership, and they are promoting a lot of technology. And I think from what I see a little bit less from the Caribbean is the working together. We are so small and we always talk about working together, but I don't know why at the end it doesn't happen. We do not work together. And that's something that I keep asking that question every time I met in these forums or I go to seminars when I'm in Caribbean. I say, you all talk about many things that we could do together, but why is that we never do it? And to be honest, I don't have an answer to that. So unfortunately, but this is something that I keep seeing, and we're so small and we're so silo-oriented that I think will be a big asset in this topic and in any other topic we do through the Caribbean, is how can we come and work together.
Yeah, excellent. And passing on to you, Professor Fiole.
Yeah, thank Sonia. That was a wonderful end. Now I have one sentence on that. I sometimes wonder if the mechanisms that we have in place, how we get to our leaders, are somewhat flawed at times. How we get to our leaders, how we appoint leaders, that mechanism may need some more scrutiny. I think that as the world is facing this huge turmoil, and it has this effect on the social space and the technology space, as we discussed, and effect on people. I think that the role of governance is becoming paramount for two roles. One is for representation for people, and on the other hand, overlooking about the execution of the right thing, let's say. And I think that for both of those elements, we need to base ourselves first, I think, on values, so first principles, on ethics, and design that representation, those governance structures, and then think about, okay, how do we execute? What role can we play? What agency can we give those stakeholders? What capabilities need to be developed? What institutions do we need with that? And make that journey, bridge that, let's say, from where we are today, in order to reach that future. And governance is a key element. So I think Kamla, I think there is a task for all of us, and also not to put it on you, but obviously governance is a key component for providing that guidance.
Yeah, thank you, and totally agree. And Avia, it's on you to leave us with a closing thought here.
Okay, so as a follow-up to what Sonia says about the Caribbean, I was talking about stuff and not getting it done. I think Kamla has the secret sauce. She's able to mobilize persons from across the world. So I think you should be a pilot case and you should be the one leading these conversations because you seem to have the secret sauce. And one word I'm gonna leave us with: collaboration, 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 because there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of experiences here across the region. If we can consolidate them, we can agree on what works or what we can use, and we can collaborate. I think we can move the needle. But Kamla, most definitely, it seems like you have the secret sauce to move this movement forward, and it's great that the Caribbean Corporate Governance is leading the charge in this regard. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all the panelists, and I totally agree. Kamla is really got something to make things happen, and we'll get out of her way and let her make the next panel happen. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Louis and Eelco, Shiva, Sonia, and Avia. Thank you so much for a really great panel discussion. So many wonderful points came out of what you shared. But I will tell you, I am happy first to accept that responsibility for CCGI, that we can be this catalyst for helping bring that level of awareness. And honestly, that's what we've been doing for the last few years. Truly, we've been building awareness. The next stage, when we think about change management, the next stage is the desire to want to make a difference. And then we'll go to what Sonia is saying. Let's actually execute together. Let's move from beyond talk into how we can do things that allows each of us to be able to feel better prepared to navigate the space that we're doing. And Eelco, I love your explanation. What brings us together? It doesn't have to be just geographical. So I appreciate all of our friends from around the world who join us from time to time to share their thoughts and give their guidance as well, because that is what opens us up to the many ideas and possibilities of what we can do here in the region. So thank you all so much. It's actually 12:58 by my clock, which means that we actually should get ready for the next panel. So forgive me, all of our participants who we have you glued to your seats, but it's been a wonderful day so far, and there's no need for us to slow down at this point. So thank you. Thank you again, Louis. Thank you, Eelco, Shiva, Sonia, and Avia.